no, not 2025, excuse me. I'm a little behind. I'm John Cleveland, Chair of the Comprehensive Planning Committee. And this is a meeting, a monthly meeting of the Comprehensive Planning Committee. The first item on the agenda, as usual, is an icebreaker moment. And Lauren is chief in charge of ice breaking.
Okay, thank you, John. So our icebreaker question is, if you were a kitchen appliance, which one would you be and why?
Would you like me to start? I would be a refrigerator. That's where the food is. Dana, you want to go your way?
I'm up. Let's see. How about ice cream maker? Everybody likes ice cream, right?
I'm lame on this one. A toaster. I like breakfast.
I'm going to go with the soda stream machine because I'm full of a lot of hot air, but I'm bubbly.
I'm going to take a lot of people's answer and say the coffee maker.
I don't think you can go wrong with a cast iron skillet. You can do a lot of things with a cast iron skillet.
Yeah, this is hard. Maybe a slow cooker.
I'd go with a garbage disposal. My wife collects things. I dispose of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Constantly condensing, making smaller, finding space.
I'm going to go with a blender, and you can just like to mix things up. And
I'm going to go with a cookie sheet because I like cookies.
I'm going to go with the KitchenAid mixer. Pretty versatile, a lot of good outcomes.
I feel like all the good ones have been taken already. I'm going to go coffee maker as well because that's my favorite kitchen appliance.
I was going to second the coffee maker, but now I will third it.
I'm going to go with the air fryer because I like to get tasks done really quick, so they're all done.
Food processor, that's what I do almost every day.
I'm going to go with a corkscrew. The one I have at home, you can open a beer bottle on one side or open a bottle of wine on the other, and I'm not going to explain it.
I'm going to go with microwave oven because who has time?
I'll just go with an oven because I like to see what we can cook up.
All good question, all good answers to questions, and we have a well-stocked kitchen. I can see it. Next item on the agenda is the roll call of the committee members and the members of the staff. Why don't we start with you, Kelly?
Kelly Butler.
Virginia Keel.
Dennis Bergeron.
Bruce Ryu.
Adam Lee.
Jeff Harmon.
John Cleveland.
Dana Staples.
Paul Jacques.
Tim Cowan.
Riley Bergeron.
Matt Duval.
Jane Coslow.
Rex Rhodes.
Phil Kroll. Dennis Dote.
David Edgar.
Lauren Cafe.
Allie Toby.
And I know that Jane, Becky Conrad is at another meeting at the Auburn Public Library this evening at this time, so she's making a presentation, so she couldn't skip. Next item on the agenda is the minutes from August 26, 2025. I read those over carefully. They were very well produced, and I have no questions about them. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Yep, Tim?
Just one inversion of letters and the word adjournment. And number 10, it's spelled incorrectly, so.
Ah,
So-
good catch. We wanted to get them correct, because these are gonna go into the historical archives for many of our people who
Motion,
follow us to read.
I'll just
Motion to
point
appro-
out that
Okay.
Lauren has become a long ranger planner,
Oh, Long Ranger.
long
plan.
ranger planner, so.
Wow, okay. Any other suggestions that you saw? We're good. Someone want to make a motion to adopt as amended?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? They are adopted unanimously. The next item, as always on our agenda, is public comment. We provide an opportunity at each of our meetings for the public to make comments, provide us with input. I do not see any member of the public here this evening, so we'll move on to the next item. Item number 5 is committee member resignation. So I wanted to inform the committee that we have had one resignation. Heidi Bertels has had to resign. The good news for her is that she found a lovely home, unfortunately, not in Auburn, but in Lewiston, so she's not able to continue to be on the committee. I've sent her our great thanks for her efforts in being a participant here, and wished her well in her new home. I want to further amplify on this and other positions here. Obviously, that position will need to be filled. The committee was formed by the mayor and council, so the mayor and council will be responsible to finding someone to fill the position at some point in the future. I think what I also want to do is just state the obvious here, that there may be some additional changes on the committee. I think you all know that Rick Whiting, city councilor, is not running for re-election. He's on the council, he's on the committee as a member representing the city council. So after the election, that position will need to be considered as well. Additional to that, Tim Cowan is running for re-election, and therefore we'll see how that election comes out with his position. And our honorable mayor is also running for re-election. We'll see how that comes out. If he doesn't succeed, this would be an historic change, since he is unopposed. However, I understand from good sources that he hopes more than 2 people vote, because if he votes and his wife votes, it will be a tie. Which I think would be similar to all of us. Further, I also want to note that there are 2 members of this comprehensive plan committee, Kelly Butler and Matt Duval, who are both candidates for the city council as well. So depending on the outcomes of the November election, there may be some action to be taken. So all of those things that I've mentioned, we'll have to partly wait to see how the election results come out, and then the council will need to act on filling those positions. And I'm sure that the mayor and council will try to do so in a way to try to maintain as much continuity and the integrity of the committee fully staffed. All right, the next item on the agenda is the draft vision statement. We have a review of 2 draft vision statements, and Ally from Barry Dunn will introduce that.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. So based on all of the work that you all did at the workshop in the last meeting, took all of those sticky notes. I think from that feedback, all of you heard some similar themes between all of those tables, some common things coming to the surface for each of those groups. Took those themes, that language that was used throughout all of your small group discussions, and put that into 2 draft options for a vision statement. The draft vision number 1 has more of a traditional narrative style vision at the beginning, and then some goals below that that builds a little bit further onto the priorities that were identified during that workshop. And then the second option has more of a guiding principle approach instead of a standard kind of narrative vision statement. So 4 guiding principles there that serve as kind of the overarching direction or vision for that option, as well as kind of 5, we use the term pillars. That term can be modified, tweaked, changed to a number of different things that have the same meaning, but similar to the goals in the first option, provide a little bit more direction for the shape of the plan as well. These are drafts, and the language can be modified, tweaked to better fit kind of the committee's direction for this plan. But at the end of your conversation, hoping to have kind of one final option and some language modifications for those as well. And then we'll make some small tweaks, update that, create more of a graphically designed version than just what's on the Word document, and then share that out with the community for their feedback and input on that vision as well.
Okay, thank you, Ally. So I'm sure that you've reviewed both drafts, option 1 and option 2. I think it would be helpful to have some discussion about the approach in each of those and how you feel about that, and how you feel it would be most useful to the comprehensive plan process. And that way give some direction to the staff to on how to proceed with the vision statement. So why don't I see if you have some comments on option 1 or draft 1 and draft 2. Virginia.
So as somebody who was not here and being able to read it without any context or knowledge of what happened in the meeting, I thought there was a lot of great work and effort being put into it, and really appreciated to be able to see, and I was able to get a great vision out of both of them. I did find number 1 easier to read, as thinking of a perspective for different language and education and all of those things. I found it easier. I read it to myself quietly, and then I read it out loud, and how it sounded and flowed, and it just seemed number 1 was a little easier. The one thing that I noticed that I asked at the end of both was, where is there accountability mentioned in the vision for the committee? I didn't see anything referenced as to, as the committee, what is our intent? What are we holding ourselves to with this vision statement?
Could I ask you to clarify what you meant by accountability?
So I jotted something down because it was easier to jot it down than to explain it. So it was something like, we will hold ourselves accountable by openly sharing progress, measuring outcomes, and ensuring committee input guides the decisions. Accountability as far as how are we going to make sure that we are standing to the value as well.
Okay. And you're thinking about after the comprehensive plan is completed and adopted, or during the process? All of the above, okay. Well, certainly during the process, it would be all of our responsibilities to take a look at the issues that you brought up about being accountable, and particularly as you get into the policies and implementation phase that comes a little later. I think how we craft those would be important to be clear on what the intent of this comprehensive planning committee is, and who in the future will be responsible for the implementation phase. Once we're done with the comprehensive plan, our work is done. So we won't have a formal role in the future of coming back and holding the future groups accountable, although as a citizen, and I've exercised that privilege from time to time, certainly all of us who've been and participated here, we feel it's useful to come to speak to a future council, certainly could do that and remind them of our work that we did and what we were hoping to be accomplished as a group. Is that helpful, Virginia? Yeah, okay. Other thoughts? Jane?
Okay. So I guess I actually found myself really liking the second version. This is what happens when you have different options, because I understood the first version to be aspirational, and it's as though it's a future tense, at least because I mean, I love the language. I mean, I'd like to think all those things are true of Auburn, but I think they're aspirational, that we're welcoming, connected, resilient. And so I struggled with that a little bit, whereas I felt really confident in saying that in the second version, those are the values that we as a group of people are affirming as we try to work towards where we think Auburn ought to be in 10 years. So I liked the structure of the second one better. The only other point I would make, and this is like it's small, but it's not small. I think the word pristine is really not the word to use here. Pristine means really untouched. And so I also wasn't entirely sure what is meant by the term complete in the second version, and I didn't know if that was like, oh, that's like complete streets or something, but I didn't know what does it mean to call it a complete community?
I'll just pose food for thought to Jane's point. The vision statement's intention is to be aspirational. So for the first version, this is Auburn in 10, 20 years. But you could structure it in the sense of this is Auburn now, and this is where we want it to go, or we want it to be all aspirational. So I think there's a, discrepancy between, because so for 2 also it is like this is Auburn in 10 to 20 years.
I think it's just because you're using present tense, you have to kind of like do that leap of, oh yeah, we're talking about Auburn in 10 years, not Auburn. And I don't want to sound like I'm dissing Auburn. It's just, I think it's,
Dana, I think you...
Yeah, sure. I think I agree with Jane that I do like the second version a little bit more. I think they both kind of check off the box for a vision statement, and I think they both have merit. What I liked particularly about the second one is that it doesn't feel... I guess I like the feel of it. Like, it doesn't necessarily make me think that this is prescriptive for the rest of the document. More of, these are the ideas that we want to make sure that we accomplish within the rest of the document. And so generally, I guess I like the second one. The one thing that I would change, though, in the second one is under the responsible land use, there's a sentence that says that existing buildings are revitalized and new homes, businesses, and institutions blend seamlessly into the fabric of Auburn's urban areas. And I think that blends seamlessly, to me, it can be interpreted lots of different ways, but one way that I think would be negative for the plan is if we had some new technology in how we make buildings. We wouldn't want to not use it if it didn't make the building not blend seamlessly into the area, right? So I think I just wouldn't want to limit our ability to evolve as a city with some language like that.
Are there other thoughts? Matt?
I liked both of them, but I also liked the second one a little bit better because I like sort of putting forward the principles that guide the plan. One thing I would say is it really struck me in the opening of the first vision statement is the use of a lot of flowery modifiers. I would just take that down a bit because it got in the way of my actually reading, what's the vibrant tapestry of, or whatever that turn of phrase was, just seems a little over the top for a document like this.
Jim?
Apologize, I'll be complicated. I actually like some of both and wondered, the idea of having a short vision statement, I think resonates for me and is easy for people to look at, but I love the pillars and the structure, as opposed to the many, many, many goals in the diagram of that. So I don't know if people might think of, could we take some of both?
Adam?
Well, I was gonna say I liked one better, but I think I like this. I'm gonna get really complicated with it. I like the writing of one better, but I like the structure of two better. And some of the issues that I had with the writing of two, I think, have been mentioned, particularly for whatever pristine also struck out to me as like, well, no, that's not what it is, nor is that something that's probably achievable. And I also think some of the other things that have been mentioned about the flowery language in two could be cut down a little bit to be a little more reasonable.
Other thoughts? Dennis?
I like them both. I kind of preferred two because of its concision. There was more brevity there, which I think is really important. I don't think at the end of this we want to have a 120-page document, given what it's used for. So concision helps with the clarity. Thanks.
Other thoughts? Well, I'll share my thoughts. I actually had a little more preference for number one. Although I share some of the comments about language, I think those are helpful to know. What struck me a little bit more about one is that I think it was intended to read as future as not as present, even though the language is present tense. I think the intent was the reader should be reading this in the future, saying this is what we believe is this community should be like in the future. It may be somewhat like that now, but the intention is in the future it should be like this. This is what we want to achieve. So I'm not put off by that tense. We could change that tense language if that was an issue, but I think it does talk about the future. The other aspect that I liked more about it is that it was aspirational, but it set more precision by naming certain areas. So natural environment, it talks about that. That would be a goal. That would be where we would put policies and implementations under that. Mobile and connected talks about the transportation system. Infrastructure and city services talks about those kinds of things that we do. It maybe, and I could go on, and I think most of them do that. I guess in my background, municipal services is by providing services in the different areas. And I think it's important to identify what we think about those service areas and what the policy should be, and then clearly what the implementation would be. I find number 2 to be more value statements, which are good, but so what's the policy about a value statement? And how does it relate to particular actions that have to be taken in the future? And so I think it's 7, the 7 goals that are set out there are a good structure, and then from there you have policies and actions that relate to particular parts. The land use plan, implementation plan, and the regional coordination in regards to these particular kinds of activities, but I think they're also broad enough to include some others. So I chose 1 because I think it's more functional and clearer and more direct, and I think for the overall community would be clearer to understand this is what we would like Auburn to be in these specific areas, and these are the policies and actions that we expect that would implement it. So that's the reason I chose that one. However, I'm outvoted.
You ready for some staff input? Or
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yes.
So I did connect with the communications director as well, because we look at this and think, how are we going to now promote this, right? How do we, is it portable? Is it memorable? Is there, how are we going to brand? And so I agree with several that I think a blend of these two would really be effective. If you look at Vision 2, that opening of the guiding principles, those are spot on. I think when we take those 4 areas, we can tie that into how we promote even recruitment for staff, how we promote engagement within the community. These are spot on. I really love these. I think they're ideal. I think they really speak to this. The only edit that I had was regarding the robust multimodal transportation network. I'm not sure about robust, but even if it's just, we would be a long way if it was just with an effective, right? I think that would be helpful. And so I really love that first section of that draft too. But then on Vision 1, the second half, and I would break it out from the 7 goals to 8 goals. I think when you look at that last goal, I think there should be a separate goal that's talking about existing infrastructure, plan strategic investments that prepare the city, respond to changing community needs and future challenges. End of that goal. And then the next goal would be to promote thoughtful land use planning and maybe break those out a bit. And so these are all goals. What we've started doing within the last 2 years is that the council's goals tie into staff's goals, which tie into, director's goals, which tie into staff goals. Everybody's working together to meet these areas that we've identified. And so for us to be able to take this and be able to communicate that down to staff, and we're able to take the guiding principles and include that into our values as an organization, to me, these documents really hit that. So there's some staff input for you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Phil. Paul? Oh.
John got me thinking, and then Phil kind of brought it all together with agreeing about that. I do like the language in the first draft, and then those 4 bulleted things at the beginning of the second one, whether they stay the same as they are or not. But I think it also, when you guys have meetings or something, you're like, is this resilient or something? You know, when you're at a meeting, is this promoting connectivity or something like that? And it can just one of those words that, okay, I've read this, so I know what it means. I don't have to say it all again. But having those key points to go back to when you guys meet, I think is important. But I do like that the language and the tense of the verbs and stuff in the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree with the thoughts that Phil and Paul have here. To me, in draft one, the two opening paragraphs are really trying to say the exact same thing, is the lead in to two, but the structure is much clearer. It gives a better picture. And then I like the goals in one. I think when we put this out in the community and we start talking about pillars, we've lost everybody right there, right? I mean, no one's going to know what a pillar is, right? But when you say, here's our goals, they get what that is. And then when they go further in the plan, they're going to be saying, okay, how does whatever I'm reading in this chapter link back to some goal that's in this opening piece?
Other comments after these? It's what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm mistaken. There's certainly folks that like parts of both 1 and 2. In fact, several of us have said they kind of see a combination of those two here, and I think a number of folks have kind of spoken to that. Is the next natural step to ask our consultants to see if they can merge those two concepts?
For discussion, I wonder what we think of the wording of 1, so the first paragraph of Vision 1, being then combined with those 4 guiding principles of 2. So if you look at the second paragraph of Vision 1, we can take out that second paragraph and add in those 4 guiding principles, perhaps. And then we keep, because it seems like we like the wording of 1. This is just a potential option we can discuss. Keep the wording of 1 and call them goals, but perhaps label them with the same way that the pillars in 2 are labeled. So there's a labeling in front of the goals on Vision 1. So there's some structure there. How do we feel?
Jeff?
You lost me along the way there someplace. What I was thinking is in draft 1, the opening 2 paragraphs, instead of it being straight text like that, we would use the bolded opening paragraph in Vision 2 with the resilient, connected, welcoming, and intentional. We would take that and replace the opening 2 paragraphs and then maintain the goals in draft 1 as they are, perhaps we're splitting out the last one, as Phil had pointed out, would make that into 2.
Yeah, I like that because I like having the bolded words kind of summarize what the whole paragraph is, just captures what it means. And then for discussion purposes, I think it's easier to just refer back to that. Remember it says.
Matt?
What Jeff and I think Phil have both proposed would solve the issue I had with number 1. So I do really like the goals. Those first 2 paragraphs are where I really had a problem. So.
I'm on board with those changes as well. I think that would work out well. So, Lauren, were you just saying put in front of the goals on Vision 1, you would put a bold 2 or 3 letter introduction to each one, like you did in Vision 2?
That's correct, yeah. And we'd call them goals and not pillars.
And I think maybe not get quite so quite so flowery, and I'd like to think that we were pristine, but I don't think we're quite there. Some folks might remember the Androscoggin River as not being pristine at all. It's much better, though. So maybe we could take a look at that kind of a little bit exaggerated and make it more contemporary.
So is the goal for staff to present a second draft of this at the next meeting and for us to accept it?
Yes. Yeah. That would be my thought. So if those suggestions are acceptable, oh, another one, I'm sorry.
Hi, sorry.
Ally, I'm sorry, I'm
Just
looking these
to
ways.
clarify and kind of solidify feedback so far. So taking the 4 guiding principles from number 2 as that introduction, kind of setting the direction for that plan, followed by the now 8 goals underneath that.
I believe that's correct.
With the addition of adding some bolded
Yeah,
summaries.
absolutely. Okay. We can take a look at some of those language modifications and simplify that a little bit, but from what we have up here, have that structure now of 2, the intro to 2 with the guiding principles, and then below that, the 8 goals.
This is pretty good work, though. After seeing all of the notes that we made last week or last month, and have it be this coherent, it makes us look good. Thank you, appreciate it. This is awesome.
Jane, I agree with you.
A quick thought about the 8 goals. I know that they may not be intended to be hierarchical, but there is something about reading things in sequence that you think some things at the top are more important. And I was sort of surprised that the resilient economy came fairly far down, because it seemed like that's so integral and essential to the well-being of the whole community. So I don't know how you finesse that. Maybe you, but people do kind of think that whatever comes at the top is most important.
It could be a potential visual option that we choose. Yeah, like a bubbles or something.
Would certainly want to avoid numbering these in that visual as well, just to avoid any confusion around priority or anything like that.
Adam?
I tend to agree with the mayor about goals versus pillars, but I'm guessing there's some rationale for the use of pillars. Otherwise, you wouldn't have brought us a draft without it. And I just, before we lay it on the cutting room floor, I'd kind of like to hear that rationale.
It just provides some different language options. So whatever the committee's preference would be, we could modify that to be priority areas, focus areas. There's a lot of different words. So we wanted to present 2 options. The idea of the pillar kind of holding up the plan is a potential visual thought for that, but.
So it's not really a substantive one, but okay.
Yeah, just a preference choice for the committee to look through.
Ally, does that give you a clarity of what we'd like to do? And you will work on those, and at our next meeting in October, we'll take a look at that on our agenda.
So
Maybe you can put a goal in a shoe and use the current diagram. Put 8 goals in the shoes.
And then the intent would be for the next meeting as well, to share an updated draft with the community as well. So at the next meeting, there would be some additional input from the community, anything that's glaringly missing from this, any language preferences from the community, to be able to finalize this as well. So that will be on Social Pinpoint.
Oh, yeah, put it on the website so folk can comment on it, yeah.
So those comments would be open for the next month until we meet in October. So Barry Dunn will make the edits that you suggested for this meeting. It goes to the public as a draft.
Right.
And then you'll discuss. So does the committee approve of that timeline? Okay.
I think so, yep. So if there's no other questions in regard to this item, we can go to land use presentation by Barry Dunn in regards to the next substantive work that we will be doing, which is working on the land use section of the comprehensive plan. So I'll turn it over to you, Ally, to walk through the presentation.
So as John mentioned, the next 6 or so months substantively from the committee will be spent working on a future land use map and future land use plan, as well as policies and actions. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time just walking through what future land use is, get the committee thinking through some different concepts, things that came up during the visioning workshop last month, as well. Just to start thinking through some of these concepts, understanding kind of what required components of the land use map are, and then use this as the basis for next month for the committee to really start putting together kind of strategies, principles, direction for what that future land use looks like. So we'll touch on schedule a little bit more in a little bit, but kind of broadly setting direction for future land use and policies through this year, and then further refining those, getting community input and feedback through January, February, March next year, and then using those future land use map components as well as the policies and actions to serve as the basis for that final draft plan. So the bulk of the next 6 months will really be spent developing, reviewing, and refining that future land use plan and those policies and actions. Want to touch on just required components of the plan. This doesn't include the inventory and analysis in this list. We typically include that as an appendix. As Dennis mentioned, want this to be a really usable document, and including the inventory can make that much lengthier. So as far as required components go, a community engagement summary and vision statement, a future land use map and descriptions of those land use categories in that future land use plan, policies and actions, a general approach to regional coordination, and then an implementation plan or strategy. So what is future land use? Broadly, future land use is a long-term vision for how land in the community should be used. It will be used to help guide growth decisions, development and infrastructure planning and investments. It's flexible, more broad than zoning is, and it's aspirational. Differs from zoning in that zoning is a tool that governs how land can be used today. It typically includes use tables and things like setbacks and dimensions, bulking requirements, those kinds of things, and really controls how building types, densities are used at the parcel level. The goal of the future land use map is to kind of define where the community wants to grow and how Auburn wants to grow, and then visions for different areas of the community. So broadly about kind of shaping the future of Auburn, guiding decision-making, which the future land use map will be used to inform future zoning changes, but the map itself and the document itself is a policy document, not an ordinance or a legal document. Be used to kind of guide development priorities and really helps to align those growth decisions and those investment decisions with the community goals that we've been hearing so far about how the city wants to grow, and what types of kind of uses there might be and how to accommodate community needs over the next 10 years. So hearing things from the community like the need to downsize, using this as a way to think about where might that go, how might that look for Auburn in the future. And then really throughout getting public input to make sure that what is included in this map captures what the community wants, different styles of neighborhoods, whether those are rural or more urban neighborhoods, to look and feel like, what the downtown should look and feel like, commercial areas really should look and feel like. Again, it's more of a vision than specifying very specific uses and very specific requirements that would be covered in a zoning ordinance update following the comprehensive planning process. So as I mentioned, there's kind of two components to a future land use map. There's those decisions about growth and where growth should be directed towards. And then there's more of that land use category vision, so breaking down a little bit more specifically what the vision for different types of places in Auburn are. So I'll start with just the growth components because the state has some specific language and requirements around this. The first is identifying a growth area. That is the state's language for that, but these are broadly areas that should see the highest amount of growth over the next 10 years, or areas where the community would like to see the most growth over the next 10 years. And these areas are typically identified based on their ability to support things like new housing and businesses and infrastructure, with the goal of maximizing existing land use, existing developed areas, while minimizing some of the negative impacts on the natural environment and existing neighborhoods and communities here. Again, growth areas should really avoid any critical natural resources like wetlands, vernal pools, rare plant species, animal habitats, things like that, and try to limit the disturbance of large areas of undeveloped land. And then typically growth areas are chosen because they have the necessary infrastructure existing already today. There's capacity for future growth, or that can easily be achieved over the next 10, 20 years. Allows the community really to better manage growth, reduce kind of outward sprawl, and promote new development that's fiscally and environmentally sustainable over the next 10 years or so. The next kind of idea around growth areas is those transition or limited growth areas. These are really areas that would see a moderate amount of growth. Think of them more as like buffers or transitions between really dense urban areas and very rural places. And they're places where some growth could be accommodated or directed, but not to the same level as those typical growth areas would. And then the third area designated are rural or non-growth areas. These are not no growth areas, but areas that should see the lowest amount of growth in the future. These are typically rural areas, agricultural areas, critical natural resources like wetlands and vernal pools are typically designated in that category. And then those three components make up that kind of growth planning section of future land use. And then there's the land use categories, place types. Those are words that we use somewhat interchangeably, but really just describe the types of places that exist or the community would like to see exist in the future. So those look at the types of homes that people would like to see in different areas, whether there's businesses or shops or offices in those kind of land use categories, how dense or spread out are those buildings? Are there transportation options? Are they connected? Are there parks and open spaces in those different areas? So it really establishes the look and the feel and the desired intent for what a specific area looks like in the future. So I want to just share a couple of examples of what this looks like. These can take a couple of different forms, but this is an example that we put together for Bridgeton this year. The growth area here is delineated by that thick black line. This is an inset of their downtown. So they want to direct growth to anything that's within this black boundary. And then within that map as well, you see the different colors are different land use categories that they identified in that plan as well. So an example of that is their downtown village neighborhood, an area that has a concentration of residential activity and diverse housing types in a well-connected, walkable neighborhood accessible to businesses, services, and recreational areas. So within the plan itself, would talk about and have some more narrative descriptions around what the intent of each of those categories are on the map. And then another example being Ellsworth, Maine here. I wanted to point out a couple of things in this example. Similar kind of growth structure here where their growth area is really around their urban core and their urban boundary, but they also identified a few new land use categories in their plan as well. One of those being the expansion of this rural conservation district to protect water quality. And then others being things like rural villages or rural nodes, these really small kind of clusters out here that the intent would be for those to be smaller convenience type uses. So people don't have to drive all the way into downtown Ellsworth in the summertime to go get milk or eggs if they don't need to. There's an intent for some smaller convenience services to help with things like traffic mitigation and other things. So within each of these categories, there's some broader intent to help meet some of those community goals. In Ellsworth, that was things like traffic reduction and the ability to have clean drinking water and some more conservation around each of their water bodies. I know that's a lot of information, so I'm going to pause there and see if there's like any questions or anything on growth areas, growth categories, future land use components.
Questions from any member of the committee? Riley?
And this is based off of, when we designated these, are we starting from the base of the last comp plan updates designation of these areas?
So I think the intent and might be beneficial to start from a place with this committee of what principles are going to guide growth. What do we want to see in terms of how we grow? What principles do we want to guide that growth? How do we want to preserve rural areas and those types of things, and start from that place and then think about growth boundaries and things like that from that place. Also evaluating things like water and sewer lines, roads, capacity to expand some of those things.
That was actually my specific thought, though, was that some of a specific portion of South Main Street was designated as a growth area, and there isn't currently sewer and water out there. So that's something that would be something we could reassess in this coming plan.
Absolutely. I think it can be helpful to start with kind of a high-level vision and not kind of build off of a previous plan, just since this is a full update of the 2010 plan as well.
Jeff?
Yeah, thank you. I think a few comments about this. I think it's going to be really important for the committee to have a unified understanding of what these growth zones are. Personally, I find it very unfortunate the way decades ago the State Planning Office labeled these as growth, limited growth, and no growth, because that doesn't accurately reflect what happens in these zones, right? So when I look at this, I think of this more of high growth, growth, and limited growth. So, you know, as an example, in Auburn today, in the existing comp plan, we have no growth areas. There is no place in the city of Auburn that's in a no growth area that doesn't permit some type of growth. It's just limited. So I think that we should really be thinking about these in that way, that we're trying to delineate the extent of the growth that we expect in these various zones. The second thing I would say that the committee should keep in mind is some actions that have occurred at the state legislature over the last couple of years. So there's a huge disconnect throughout the state in a lot of comprehensive plans, because in the past, the state, as part of your conformance review, has required a growth area. That's not a problem in a place like Auburn, but it's a problem in lots of places in the state, because what we would all think of as a growth area doesn't exist. The legislature, and the best place to understand this is in the prior legislature to look at LD 2003, and in this past legislature, LD 1829. So the state legislature has set some very specific expectations regarding growth, especially around housing, and those are all tied, when you have a comprehensive plan, to a growth zone. So one of the things I think we need to think about as we go forward, is when Ally was talking about guiding principles, is to understand that there are statutory expectations around growth zones. And you know, I've been in a couple meetings with the Legislative Housing Committee here recently, and it's a common theme from municipalities around the state is they've designated growth zones, and none of these expectations fit in this, because when they did their comprehensive plan, they didn't really think through what a growth zone meant, right? So these expectations at the state level are all really tied to high density, high growth areas. So we want to be careful when we think about this, that we have that context when we're thinking about where our growth zone, or as I like to think of it, high growth zone would be. So, and I agree with Ally. I think we'll probably have more conversation about this, but I think it's going to be really important to identify the principles that we're going to use for each of these zones, what the committee's expectation is around those zones before we ever open a map and start looking at where we'll apply them, right? I think we need to have a common understanding of what those our principles and expectations are, and then apply those to the map and see where that leads us. You know, we may need to make modifications as we go along. And the third thing I would say, because in talking to other municipalities, I find this is a common theme. There's no expectation that zones are contiguous, right? There's nothing that says that in a city the size of Auburn that there can't be multiple growth zones, or there can't be multiple limited growth and no growth zones, right? And I think if we think about the principles and we apply those to the map, that's what that will lead us to.
I'll just add some similar language to Mayor Harmon. When we're saying foundational principles, we can also think of it as practical limitations of growth. So when we're not starting from a blank map, we're starting from a practical limitation of water and sewer, of where natural resources are, if we look at our inventory analysis. So our foundational principles are basically our boundaries, our barriers that you as a committee don't feel like we could have growth in certain spots. So that would be our starting point.
Okay. Perhaps it might be useful if I shared some thoughts in regards to how I sort of see the procedure here among this committee over the next 2 or 3 meetings here. October, November, maybe into December. I think for the purposes of the public who may be following what we're doing, it is important to clarify that what this committee is doing is not zoning. Zoning is a totally different activity, and as alluded to here, really talks more about very specific kinds of things, lot sizes, setbacks, those kinds of things. So that's not what this committee is charged to do, and we won't be doing that. What we'll be doing is looking at the broader land uses and 3 broad kinds of descriptions that are not perfect, but generally speaking, an area where you would expect to be a lot more growth and some transition type zones, and perhaps areas where there'd be much less growth, maybe in the resource protection, for example, and identifying those areas that will then form a basis for future more specific zoning by a different group, not this group. I think it's also important that we start by making sure that we're all using terms that we all accept as common meanings for those terms, so that when we're talking about them, we're all clear that this is what we're talking about on terms, what growth is, what limited growth is. Next, I also think it's important in guiding in our work. Auburn's a big city, 65 square miles here. So I think to help direct our efforts for the community and for the community to understand, it would be useful if we discussed and accepted certain principles as we've alluded to. So for example, would one of the principles be that more dense growth would be associated with utility infrastructure, where water and sewer or other utilities, or at least nearby, and that we would use that kind of principle and guideline, that we, areas that are wetlands or natural resources would be areas that we would accept as limited growth or no growth areas. And there'd be a series of those principles. The other thing that I think would be helpful for us to do is there are already areas that are self-defined in this community. And we should probably lay those out on a map. So for example, cemeteries, we're probably not going to build in those. So we should know where they are. We should know where the floodplains are. We should know where the wetlands are. We should know where very steep slopes are that are difficult to build on. We should know where the city parks are in the community. A whole series of things that it's already defined by how they've been used and intend to be used in the future. So that when we're looking at the map, we can start by saying these areas are really kind of self-defined. And they tell us what use they've been in and what they're likely to be in the future. Then that would bring us to the balance of the map, where we can then apply the principles to the balance that's left and say, okay, what are the characteristics and principles that we've agreed to, and how does that fit into particular sections on the map when we're looking at it? And then piece by piece, we can come to consensus on what kind of land use they would be in the future. I think if we do follow that systematically over the next 2 or 3 meetings, I think we can come to a pretty good consensus on what we think is appropriate going forward in the future. Does that sound like a reasonable approach to members of the committee to do that? Okay. All right, so I'll work with staff and with consultants to set that up and have them do all the heavy lifting. I just do the talk part of it, and bring that forward for our October meeting to start with, and then into November. And what will flow from that as well, from our discussions, will be policies and actions for those particular areas. Adam?
For clarification, is the notion to basically put some of those principles on paper
Yes.
for us to review, say at the October meeting?
Yes, well, yes, which would not mean they would be exclusive of other ideas or all-inclusive, but it would be something to start from. Ally?
I think for the October meeting, really providing you all with as much information as you need, all of the maps, all of those things in an easy direction, and using that meeting for you all to kind of discuss and set forth that direction, those principles, whatever the committee wants to end up calling those, and then following that, once we kind of have that direction, would give some options or something for the committee to react to, respond to, modify, change in November.
And many of those maps are in the inventory analysis, so you can kind of look through that before the October meeting as well.
And there's a story map version of that up online, and the maps are a lot easier to zoom into, zoom out of as well. So if that's helpful, then looking at kind of a static PDF version as well, that is also available for you all to use.
Yeah. Yep, Dana?
Yeah, I just, looking through the packet, I guess I wondered if maybe, Ally, if you could kind of talk through a little bit, just looking at the Ellsworth example, the one thing that kind of struck me as a little odd is that the growth boundary is drawn through zone, or I don't know what the right word is, the neighborhood designations. Is that typical? And like, do you know what the rationale in doing something like that is?
For this particular example, they have an urban core that is kind of set a boundary that they have kind of codified. So that is their urban core boundary. They have a lot of large parcels, kind of wanted to continue looking at those uses and providing some transition areas outside of that urban core. So that was some of the rationale of extending that. But typically what we've seen followed is similar to the Bridgeton example, where there's a little bit more of a clean boundary around those, and growth boundaries aren't cutting through parcels or through land use categories unless there's an exception for water, sewer, those kinds of things. But if the land use itself and the intent of that area is not different, but there's some constraints around water and utility infrastructure, roads, those kinds of things would be a rationale for cutting something down the middle.
Thanks.
Jeff?
So, Ali, when I was looking at these two example maps, it seems to me that it's binary. They've defined growth zones and no growth zones, and neither of these seem to have the concept of a limited growth zone. And I think from your earlier comments, what we're proposing, at least initially, to work through is growth zones, the limited growth zone be some type of a transitionary zone that has less dense development, but not a no-growth zone. So these would look a little different, I think, if they use the 3 types of zones instead of just the 2. Is my observation here correct?
Yeah, they definitely would. In these 2 communities and through the Growth Management Act, transition areas aren't required on the map. They chose to just have growth and non-growth and just have one boundary. But in some of that language and some of those land use categories, you'll see some discussion or language around kind of this is a transition area for residential uses between commercial mixed use areas and more rural neighborhoods on the outside. So there's some of that language, but they weren't called transition areas for simplicity purposes.
Yeah, so on the Ellsworth map, as example, to follow up on Dana's, I thought it was very strange when I first looked at the Ellsworth map as well. So as an example, if you look at that growth boundary, the top orange part extends outside the growth. It's actually in a no-growth zone, but it's urban. And on the lower end, there's a blue area that's residential. It would seem to me it would be clearer if those were limited growth zones and was a transition between that core out to these very rural areas.
And those are things that the committee can discuss and determine. These were decisions that were made by these communities and their committees.
And I think for future reference, maybe we can shy away from using the word zone and use growth area, limited growth area, no growth area, because I start getting confused too. And then land use categories, because it's not a zone as we know it, it's an area and then a category.
Adam?
Along the lines of these last 2 questions, I'm just trying to make sure I understand why these 2 examples were included. It wasn't for us to sort of look at those as policy things we should copy, but rather examples of what a future land.
Yeah, it was just an example that was easy to show a line delineating growth and a land use category in one map. Those were just those examples for those sakes.
Those are 2 areas where Harry done work.
Yes, those are also plans that we have put together.
Other thoughts or questions in regards to the task that will be ahead of us in the next 2 or 3 months? That should be quite exciting to be working on that.
John, could I quick add something? Hi.
Oh,
sorry.
Allie.
In the rest of this presentation, there's just some additional background information based on what came up from the committee at the last meeting. So things like infill development, dense downtown radiating from the center, those are all kind of concepts that came up, as well as environmental sustainability, affordability, fiscal impact, and infrastructure maintenance. So there's just some additional information and resources in there that I won't walk through today, but wanted to just share some concepts with the committee for each of those as well.
They were very helpful, so thank you for including them.
Just for information for the committee, it's our plan on October 6th to do an update with the city council, where we are in the process. So I and Lauren and David, I think, will probably be there doing that. And then on October the 14th, we make a similar presentation to the planning board. I think, David, you got them a little excited last time. They thought they were getting the comprehensive plan in bulk. But we're just giving both of those important bodies a sense of where we are and where we're going. So far, I think we're right on schedule, so we're doing well. And just a reminder that ultimately, sometimes in June, July of next year, would we be looking for a final presentation to the city council for adoption. Or at least presenting it to them, and hopefully they'll schedule it for adoption. Is there, okay, where are we on this agenda? We're suggesting 2 changes in our next meeting dates. So in November, we're suggesting November 18th, because our regularly scheduled meeting will be 2 days before Thanksgiving, which seemed not a good time. And then in December, same thing, we're suggesting December 16th, because the regularly scheduled meeting will be a couple days before Christmas. And unless we want to spend Thanksgiving and Christmas together here, I think changing the dates would be a great idea. Unless there's objection, take a look at your calendars. I hope that you can make those dates. We'll schedule our meetings then. And our next meeting in October is October the 28th. Anything else from the committee this evening? Dana?
Probably not important, but I was just looking at my calendar, and November 11th, Veterans Day, is a city holiday, but that's the second Tuesday in November. What would be the date for the planning board meeting that month? Could it potentially be the 18th?
I already called dibs for the 18th.
We get first dibs.
Fair enough.
Allie?
Before you wrap, John, would I be able to just talk about the schedule for the next couple months as well?
Sure.
So in your packets also have a very high-level schedule for what the next couple of months will likely look like through July. So we don't have specific dates in here because these things might fluctuate or change, but broadly, as we discussed, October, November, December, really putting together those preliminary concepts and drafts of that future land use plan, that future land use map. The intent of that time is to put together something that the committee would feel comfortable putting out for public input and public feedback during the month of January, collecting that feedback and then further refining that map and those land use categories through February, January, February, and early March. And then at the same time, because the two are very interrelated, we found it helpful to do policy and action development while the land use map is being created, and proposed some potential subcommittee meetings following the October meeting to start putting together some policy direction for those goal areas that were defined in the vision statement. Again, using November, December, those committee meetings to refine that subcommittee work so that everybody here has a say and input in all of those and things aren't being developed kind of asynchronously, but that there's regular check-ins, and using January as the month to really get a pulse check with the community and then further refining those through February, developing that implementation plan. So that would build off those final policies and actions, working with city staff, community partners to identify responsible agencies, things like relative cost, priority, timeline, those kinds of things. And using March, April, May to really review and finalize the draft content in that final plan before that goes to city council and other bodies for review and approval. Have some time built in for updates to the planning board, city council workshops, so that these things aren't a surprise when they're finalized, and that planning board and city council have some time with those documents as well before they're asked to make decisions and vote on those.
We'll be busy over the next several months.
It'll be a big push for the next 6 months. And as needed, we've proposed, if the committee does need more time, the potential for a second meeting in potentially February and March to really kind of finalize that content if there's a need for, or a desire for additional time with some of that content to really finalize and refine that.
Yeah. Okay, we'll have some further discussion on how those subcommittees will function, and we also need to have further discussion on how the public engagement process will work as well. There's nothing further. I'd accept the motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded by Tim. All those in favor? Again, thank you all for your time and your diligence. Very much appreciated.